Just like before, this meeting is going to be recorded. So I'm going to pause because we need to key in a few buttons here on our side.
This conference is being recorded. Only the main conference is recorded.
Okay, good morning. Welcome to the Finance Audit Committee meeting of the CHFA Board of Directors. The meeting is being audio recorded. Please identify yourself before speaking. We will start with a roll call of the Finance Audit Committee members. I'm going through my list now. Jerry Abrams, here. Timothy Hodges. I think that's a yes. Kathy McKinnon. Here. Josh Perez. Here. Sarah Sanders. Here. Jared Smith. Here. Franklin Perry. And Gwendolyn Thames.
His name, I was on mute. I had to get back through my screen.
No worries. Jared, I want to hand it off to you.
Okay, so we will officially now convene the meeting for the Thursday, or June 5th, and we have one action item, and we'll hand it back to Ed, I guess, here.
Yep. Good morning, it's Ed Miskowski. You have in your package the standard single-family resolution to authorize the issuance of bonds to continue funding single-family home ownership. While this would technically be the third issuance for the year 2020, it would actually be the second permanent issue for single-family. The previous bond issue, the 2020 Series B bond issue, was a $75 million taxable temporary bond issue. This resolution is for the issuance of up to $100 million of bonds. It will be combined with the remaining 2020 Series B authorization. The actual amount of bonds to be issued for lendable proceeds is expected to be around $110 million. There's also expected to be some bonds issued for refunding previously issued bonds. The bond issue is expected to close by the end of August, but will depend on market conditions. There is expected to be 3 single-family issuances in 2020 and 1 multi-family bond issue. So each of the 4 senior managers is expected to take turns running the books on an authority bond issue in 2020. RBC will be the book-running senior manager this bond issue. There's about $95 million of single-family reservations and commitments in the pipeline. Does anybody have any questions?
This is George. I have a question.
Yes.
You stated that this is eventually a third authorization, but it's a second, whatever the word you use. I think I know the answer, but I don't want to assume. Can you explain that, please?
Yeah, the second issue was a temporary, was a taxable bond. There were current maturities that were coming due in May 15th. In order to preserve the volume cap, we need to issue bonds before May 15th. But the market...
Hi, Gwendolyn Thames just joined. Apologies for being late.
But the market was still in, market's still in turmoil, so instead of issuing some permanent single-family bonds, we issued a taxable bond with the intention of taking out sometime within the year. So that bond was kind of a bridge to save volume cap and to temporary fund some single-family purchases. This will actually be a tax-exempt, a normal permanent bond issue. So that's kind of why it's really, even though it's the third issue, the second one was just a temporary holding. It was a direct placement.
Right. Okay, I just want to make sure. The other thing I want to point out is, and you guys may know this already, but when Fargo did pass, was notified that they did pass that most recent CRA. So they should be able to go back to whatever status we used to use them before.
Well, that's good news.
they should go back to the rotation or whatever it is.
Was that Wells Fargo? This is Sarah Sanders. Did you say Wells Fargo?
Yeah. They went from outstanding to the worst rating, right back to outstanding. Government is the best. Okay.
This is Kathy McKitty. Yeah, this is Kathy McKitty, and I was just interested in the bond sale is contingent on market conditions. So what would be those market conditions that would have the sale go forward?
We need basically the spreads. We want to make sure that the tax-exempt market isn't still put way out of whack compared to the taxable market. Because last time it was essentially cheaper to issue taxable bonds than tax-exempt. So the muni market has been coming down, so that's what we've been watching.
And Kathy, this is Hazim. Just to add to that, the challenge for a municipal issuer like CHFA is we tend to issue long bonds or 30-year bonds to support our 30-year mortgages. And due to the dislocation and the pandemic, investors, they prefer to buy bonds at the shorter maturity or anything less than 10 years than to commit to something very long. So if we, and not to say that there is no investor, it's just that you need to pay more to get somebody interested in buying a 30-year bond.
Okay, thank you.
Right, any other questions there? And I have a motion to approve this.
Because it's a resolution, I'll take a roll call.
Okay, this is George Perez. I move the resolution. Is there a second?
Yes, I'll second.
Any other questions or comments before we for Hazim does the roll call? If not, you got it, Hazim.
Okay, thank you. Jerry Abrams?
Aye.
Sim Hodges?
Yes.
Kathy McKinnon?
Aye.
George Perez?
Yes.
Sarah Sanders?
Aye.
Jared Schmidt?
Aye.
Wanda Wintain? Glenn?
Aye, can you hear me now?
Yes. I'm assuming is it I? Yes. Okay, Jared, that's I'm guessing is a yes.
Okay. Okay, so let's just. Are we comfortable closing the vote? And are we comfortable with that as a yes vote from Gwendolyn Thames?
Yes, I said yes. I'm sorry. I don't know something about my connection, but I yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for confirming. And the item passes unanimously.
Thank you. So the next few items are all just reports, but the first one is about the Libel transition plan. If you remember, back in April, we had a presentation done by our external auditor regarding the audit result for calendar year 2019, and within that report and presentation, our auditor did identify for the board's information or knowledge that they are making the board aware about the Libel and its transition by it going away. So what we would like to do this morning is to provide you with some color about what CHFA have been up to and what it is planning to do to deal with the Libel transition. So Ed, you want to take it over?
Okay. You have in your package a report on the authority's position from LIBOR. The London Interbank Offered Rate, better known as LIBOR, is used as a reference rate in 415 million of the authority's outstanding bonds and 915 million notional of outstanding authority swaps. The dollar amount that our authority pays on these bonds and swaps is calculated as a function of LIBOR. LIBOR is expected to cease being a reference rate by the end of 2021. It is estimated that there is over $400 trillion worth of LIBOR contracts and bonds currently in use. BAM's objective is to replace LIBOR as a reference rate in current authority LIBOR index bonds and swaps, where the replacement rate will result in approximately the same amount of bonds and swap payments as before the replacement. The replacement rate needs to be accessible to the authority, its bondholders, and swap counterparties. Its transaction costs need to be done at a minimum amount. In other words, the reference rate that replaces LIBOR on the bonds should result in approximately the same amount of debt service on the bonds as with LIBOR, and similarly, the payments on the swaps should be approximately the same with the replacement rate as with LIBOR. The Federal Reserve convened the Alternative Reference Rate Committee, commonly referred to as ARC, to identify a robust alternative to U.S. dollar LIBOR and developed a checklist to assist firms in making the transition alternative rate. BAM is using this checklist for the transition away from LIBOR. The report in your package details this transition. I would like to highlight some of the issues and entities involved, and then Bob Lamb will discuss the current U.S. dollar LIBOR alternatives. Besides the Federal Reserve that I already mentioned, there are three major entities that will impact the LIBOR transition. The first, the International Swaps and Derivatives Association, more commonly known as ISDA. As its name implies, ISDA sets the standards for swaps that the authority uses. As such, ISDA needs to release two essential items for transitioning away from LIBOR. First, ISDA needs to release a protocol for a standard amendment of swap contracts for legacy swap contracts. The authority has 36 contracts with 9 different counterparties that have a LIBOR component that will have to be amended. Excuse me. Negotiating each one individually would be time-consuming and expensive. And second, ISDA needs to finalize its fallback. Fallback, which is described in Exhibit C in the report in your package, a replacement rate that will become effective automatically if LIBOR becomes unavailable. Fallback would become the standard replacement for LIBOR. This fallback is what some of the current authority bondholders are waiting for. Next, there is the Government Accounting Standards Board, also known as GASB. The authority follows GASB, which has issued guidance for LIBOR transition as it relates to certain hedging derivative instruments and to items being hedged when the reference rate is replaced. Exhibit D in the report in your package has a statement from GASB. And third, can't forget the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS. The IRS is in proposing guidance as to what will be qualified rate for replacing LIBOR. Since many of the authority swaps hedge taxes and bonds, IRS rules will need to be followed. Exhibit E in the report details the IRS proposed definition of a qualified rate, a substantial equivalence of fair market value concept, which in essence states that the fair market value of the instrument after the reference rate change will need to be substantially equivalent in the fair market value of the instrument before the reference rate change. NAF has begun the transition process by having LIBOR replacement language incorporated into its new swaps. Also, the latest new tax-exempt swap has been CHFA-based. and the authority became the first state housing finance authority to issue a SOFR, a secured overnight financing rate bond, when it issued a 2019 Series C bond issue. Currently, there are three main U.S. dollar reference rates contemplated to replace LIBOR: SOFR, Fed Funds, and SIFMA. Bob Lamb, financial advisor and qualified independent representative, will now discuss these alternative reference rates and the alternative reference rates that Lamont has been working on. Bob?
Yeah, thank you, Ed. Okay, so this issue has been around for 18 to 24 months. What we are talking about is looking at a pipeline where we are a very small part of that pipeline of about $200 trillion worth of U.S. contracts that are going to be subject to this change in LIBOR. We have, at Lamont, basically taken the position that while we are interested and willing to cooperate on whatever the overall change is from LIBOR to SOFR or whatever the index would be, we also believe that our clients, particularly CHFA, should be willing to or should be able to take advantage of other indices if they prove to be more beneficial. And our problem with the way that the whole process is working is, well, first of all, the whole SOFR thing is behind schedule, in my opinion. We haven't got clear plumbing. When I say plumbing, it's like, do the dealers have all of the internal mechanisms in place to track SOFR, to provide us with a term loan rate, things like that? And the answer to that is not yet. So we don't really want to go on a wing and a prayer here. And so our position is we want to see how things are rolling out, take advantage of whatever is best for CHFA, but not necessarily just go with whatever ISDA says is going to be the conversion rate from LIBOR to SOFR, because the conversion rate, the problems that you will see in this process, if you want to dig into the weeds, is SOFR is a secured index. LIBOR is not a secured index. So you have differences among the index. Then in addition to that, we have terms that we have negotiated in LIBOR which are not available with all of the indices that are out there. For example, we have termination provisions that we have built into our swaps where we can terminate the swaps at our option at any time after a certain date. We would like to continue to have those things in place, but not all of the indices provide for us to be able to have that because they just don't have those things built in. So we are looking at what is the best approach for CHFA, which may be a mix of whatever indices exist based upon the individual characteristics of each of the swaps that we have. So for example, we may have a swap with a 12-year term where we may be willing to do that without a termination option and a changeover. But we may have some swaps that have a 20-year or 25-year term where we want to preserve our termination options. And if we do, then we will be looking at different indices. The thing that we can rely on, which is the good news, is that the way that the IRS has framed its willingness to look at alternatives alternative swap rates and things like that, is that they have to be substantially equivalent in market value to the date that we do the changeover from our LIBOR swap. So for a LIBOR swap is, let's say, minus $2 million, meaning it's $2 million to the benefit of our counterparty, would want to wind up with a swap that was approximately $2 million to the benefit of our counterparty in whatever we change over to. And given that, I think that our economics are going to be such that we're not going to lose, it's not going to cost us a lot more basis points to be able to stay in these swaps, but we are going to have an open mind about how we manage going into these. We may do a mix of SIFMA, Fed funds, and SOFR, and I would be surprised if we didn't do a mix of that, given some of the things. One of the issues that we all have to deal with, for example, is that we have some debt that's also denominated with LIBOR that are all held by the Federal Home Loan Banks, and they are being told that they will need to move that debt to SOFR. And so we would expect, for example, from a hedging point of view, that we would probably want to be in SOFR, for that particular amount of debt, and that I think is, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's like more than 500 million.
Yeah, it's right around 500 million.
Right. Okay. So, there's a lot of pieces to this that we are going to be looking at. We want to do the market values for every single one of our swap transitions to make sure that we are doing this correctly, and maintaining our relationship that we want to with what it's going to cost us out of pocket. And I think, with that, I'll turn it back to Ed. I don't know if anybody has any questions that they have.
Sorry, I have one question, Bob.
Yeah.
Why is it because as the dealers transfer to SOFR, there is not a options market, so that's why we will lose our termination options when we transfer the index over?
So we will lose our termination options if we transfer to Fed Fund, because there is not
for SOFR
market in that. But there may be an options market in SOFR. Problem is we are probably 2 years ahead of schedule for when that options market will actually exist, as we all know. The problem here is we have, from on high, people telling us we have to do this by a certain date. We're looking at the market, we're talking to the dealers, and they're not really, they haven't done the plumbing internally in many cases, and if they have done the plumbing internally, they're still not ready to tell us that they can do a contract that's longer than 10 years. And so we need to see how this is going to play out. We do hope to have, if we have an option, a termination option in LIBOR, we hope to have that termination option in SOFR, but we can't guarantee that we got that yet, because nobody knows.
And the dealers are going to go to, as I understand it, they're going to take their cleared swaps to SOFR by the fall. And it's my understanding that if they do that, then we should get more liquidity and more, potentially more duration once that occurs. I'm not sure that's the case, but that's what I've been told.
I was going to say, the expression on Wall Street is from your lips to God's ear. But, this is what we hope will happen. But we don't know what's going to happen. And every time that we've set a deadline, we've been disappointed. So, it's really a case where they're going to back themselves up into a corner. And my fear is is that ISDA is going to come out with a pronouncement that says this is what you have to do, and it won't consider the fact that we're AAA and somebody else might be single A. And those are issues that are of concern to us, generally from the point of view of making sure that we're getting the most value for our money.
There's I've been on quite a bit of conference call or webinars with the bankers, and they poll the audience. And one of the interesting things is they ask, do you believe SOFR is going to be, do you believe LIBOR is going to be gone by 2021? And usually about 80, 85, 90%, and depending on which call I'm on, say no. So there's a big disbelief among participants that LIBOR is actually going to disappear, which doesn't help. And one of the other issues with SOFR is the size. The Federal Home Loan Bank has been kind of taking the lead, if you will, with issuing SOFR bonds. They've issued like 200 billion of them, which sounds a lot, but when you compare it to the LIBOR market, it's a round off here. So there's such small amounts of SOFR bonds being issued, and when they are issued, they're issued short within a few years. So there's no real curve that you can use to discount stuff. So that's another problem that, as Bob says, if this was like a 5-year transition plan, it would probably work quite smoothly. But the condensed time frame really works against us. And a lot of people that, are waiting for big players, kind of anecdotally, they're working for the big players to actually issue stuff, Fannie, Freddie, and people are hoping the Treasury does something where that would kind of send a statement that this is really the index that's to be used. Anybody have any questions?
This is George. I do. Obviously, like it's been indirectly mentioned, that it impacts banks big time, but a little different than in the bond market, because there are a lot of loan documents that use LIBOR as a rate, but when it comes to your typical, and I'm oversimplifying the whole issue, your typical loan is very simple. It's state LIBOR or alternative rate as it may be, used at the time. But I've heard some terminology mentioned in this presentation that I would like some clarification. Like one of them was that the LIBOR was secure, but SOFR was not. Can you explain what you mean by secure?
Yeah, LIBOR has credit risk built into it. LIBOR rate was a rate that banks trade among themselves, and these are for-profit banks. Whereas,
and it's even got a big trouble too. Some of them got fined big time.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. And
well, it wasn't real.
SOFR is based on secured with treasuries. So SOFR is considered a risk-free rate. So there's a credit component with the two. And the other issue is LIBOR is forward-looking. It's a rate that people intend to lend at, whereas SOFR is backwards looking. It's based on historical rates. So those are kind of the two fundamentals.
I mean, one of the problems that we have is that SOFR doesn't have a long-term term rate yet that the market can rely on. So, this is an important component to doing something with long-term for us, particularly because so many of our derivative contracts go out for 15, 20 years, sometimes longer. So,
and is that because your offerings have been around that long, or?
SOFR's been around for about 18 months.
Exactly.
And when we do our standard, which might be high, we admit it, but our standard is we'd like to see 5 years of SOFR adjustments so that we can then do a regression analysis to see how they compare to other short-term rates, and then make our adjustments accordingly. Right now, what the folks are telling us is, well, you can't have 5 years, but you can assume it's going to be a certain relationship. And we're happy to assume it's going to be a certain relationship, except for the fact that it's not a certain relationship. I mean, the reality tells us it's not really there. It's not the same. So we are working with that. We're, I want to say, kicking and screaming sometimes to deal with these issues, but that's the way it is. And this is a case of people setting a deadline, and the plumbing isn't quite ready yet.
Can I ask that this presentation be emailed to me? Because we still haven't figured out how I can print from my Surface.
Yeah, that's not a problem.
Yeah, no, because that sounds nice. Like I said before, when it comes to the straightforward loan, I'm very familiar with Libel. Just have to, because we're going to be, part of our examination is determining what the impact and the safety and soundness of the institutions we regulate are, and also obviously that the consumer, i.e. the business who took out the loan, is not taken advantage of. But when it comes to the bonding side, it's fairly new to me. In the presentation, we also say transaction costs. When you mention transaction costs, again, I don't want to assume, is that like the legal fee, like the consultant fee, or what costs you were talking about?
This would be mostly not mostly, but legal fees, the ones that I was more concentrating on are the legal fees associated. If we have to open up all 39 was it 39 or 36 swap contracts, there's 36. If we have to open up all 36 contracts, negotiate amendments, you've got lawyers' fees on both sides that would become expensive. That's why, and that's just us, which is we're not even a drop in the ocean compared to what the contracts out there. So if everyone had to do that, obviously bonanza for lawyers, but it would become prohibitively expensive. That's why we're all waiting for ISDA to release protocols of basically blanket amendments where they'll come up with a protocol that says, here's what the new reference rate will be, and this is how the swap will be amended. So the thing will take automatically with very little, lawyer involvement. So that's one of the main transaction costs I was referring to.
And one of the issues, obviously, is we want to make sure that when that kind of thing comes out of ISDA, that it's something that we all agree with. And that's one of the problems with having stuff come out kind of so late in the process is they may try to do a one-size-fits-all, and we're not sure that we want to be in a one-size-fits-all.
But I'm not so sure you're going to have an option.
And we may not have, we don't know whether we're going to have an option.
So let's not create more, let's not try to create a cure for something that doesn't exist yet, right?
Right, but what we want to be sure is that we maintain whatever options we have.
Well, we understand the options we have.
Right.
Because my understanding is there may not be much option. If it did, but thank you.
Hi, this is Kathy. So what index would be used then for the bond issue we just approved?
The bond issue approved will be tax exempt. So there'll be fixed rate bonds that it'd be floating. If it's floating, it'd be tied to the tax exempt market. Essentially, the bonds when they're market, they're tied to SIPMA. So they wouldn't have anything to do with LIBOR.
Okay.
I think to Kathy's question, though, we're not going to be issuing any either floating rate notes or synthetic fixed using LIBOR in the foreseeable future.
We don't.
Just risk of stating the obvious.
Don't plan on it, but one never knows. I can tell tell you an anecdotal story. I'm not sure how true this is, but some of the bankers have been telling me that when the Treasury, in part of the stimulus packages, when the Treasury get banks to borrow at a SOFR rate, currently they wouldn't do it. So the Treasury actually had to flip them to LIBOR to get the banks to actually borrow for stimulus. This is what they're telling me anecdotally. So we don't plan on doing it, but one, this Fargo, one never knows.
But Jerry, to answer your question, I mean, since this has come up, we have been, very focused on two things. One is, if we are doing a LIBOR contract, we have some language about the transition built into our contract. And the second is that we've been looking very, very clearly and directly at, what are our options in terms of LIBOR. And the last deal we did, I think we did in SIGMA. So.
Yeah, just with the uncertainty of this SOFR LIBOR transition and the impact on our borrowing cost, it's so to your earlier point with respect to relationships, which is concerning. It would mean that we don't really, if we're borrowing in LIBOR, and it becomes a problem, we don't really know what rate we're borrowing at.
That, among others, is one of the reasons that we're recommending that we try to keep our options as open as possible.
Okay, understood.
Any other questions, comments? Okay. So the next item on the agenda is financial reports. Allison?
Good morning, all. I will be reviewing the May monthly financial report. On the revenue side, mortgage loan and investment interest revenue are coming in $5.1 million below budget for the 5 months ending May 31st and $7.1 million lower than prior year. Revenue shortfalls continue to be largely a result of the decrease in single-family loan production. The amount of single-family first mortgages originated during the first 5 months of this year are $77.7 million lower than the same time last year. Coupled with the fact our single-family loan prepayments have increased by $21.6 million over the same 5-month time period of last year. The net effect of those two items is a portfolio reduction of about $100 million. Additionally, as part of the reason for the year-over-year large variance is attributed to $3.4 million in non-recurring mortgage interest income recognized in 2019 as a result of the restructure/sale of Ninth Square. On the expense side, bond interest expense is below budget by $4.5 million and is $2.2 million lower than prior year. This variance continues to be basically due to the acceleration of the amortization of bond premiums. Administrative expenses are coming in $2.9 million under budget and $548,000 less than prior year. When you exclude salaries and bennies of $10.2 million, the current year-to-date expenses are $232,000 lower than prior year's admin expenses. And then lastly, there is no change to the expenses that we've incurred related to COVID from prior months. Are there any questions?
Hi, this is Kathy. Do you think some of the savings are due to the working from home and COVID related? It seems like there are a lot of savings on the admin side.
There's a couple big drivers on the admin side. We're actually approved for 142 positions, and currently Currently, we have about 132, so we have about 10 positions. And then also our foreclosure related expenses are down by quite a bit over prior year. The portfolio is lower, and John might be able to speak a little bit more in detail about that. But those are the two main drivers behind the significant savings we're seeing in admin expenses.
Thanks.
Any other questions on the financial reports?
Okay, hearing none, we're moving to the next item. John, you want to take it away to talk about the delinquency and forbearance?
Sure. Good morning. For the month of May, the authority purchased 157 loans totaling $28 million, of which 133 loans totaling $23 million securitized, or approximately 83% of our production. The remaining 24 loans totaling $5 million were whole loans. The average loan balance was $180,000 approximately. The May month-end mortgage-backed security balance was $2.45 billion, which was an increase of $5 million over the prior month, while the whole loan portfolio through April declined by 74 loans, or $20 million net, with a total portfolio balance of $1.6 billion. The overall delinquency rate month over month declined by 30 basis points to 2.31%, while the carrying balance for loans in foreclosure year over year decreased by $11.7 million, which Allison was just referring to $38 million, while the total number of loans in foreclosure decreased by 94. For the month of May, the authority funded 76 down payment assistance loans totaling $469,000 with the average loan size of $6,175. Approximately 48% of CHFA borrowers utilize a down payment assistance loan with their home purchase. With regard to single-family forbearances, 814 whole loan borrowers had requested and received forbearance with their April mortgage payment. These 814 loans comprised of about $101 million of UPB and about $610,000 of monthly P&I payments. However, approximately a third of those borrowers still made their April payment, even though they had been granted forbearance. In May, we had an increase of 750 loans in forbearance for a total of 1,564, comprising $197 million of UPB and about $1.2 billion of monthly P&I payments, or 11% of our whole loan portfolio. That's comparable with the 11.8% national average for Ginnie Mae loans, which are essentially securitized FHA loans. Our 78% of our the authority's portfolio and for the loans in forbearance are FHA loans. With regard to multifamily, for the month of May, the authority did not close any new loans. The portfolio decreased by one loan to 546, or $1.24 billion. Permanent loan delinquencies increased by 4 loans to 7. Construction loan decreased by 1 loan to 1 loan. Combined delinquency rate was 1.85%. For multifamily forbearances, as of the end of May, 2 of the 5 forbearances granted in April elected to use reserves to pay their debt service, while the remaining 3 withdrew their forbearance request and currently owe their April and May payments. The authority granted forbearances in additional 7 projects in May, comprising of 1.1% of the total UPB of the multifamily portfolio. Are there any questions?
Any other questions? Seeing none.
Okay, next item, Sherry, you want to talk about the monthly tracking?
Sure. In rental housing this month, there is one proposed development, Armstrong Court, the second phase in Greenwich. This is a family development in a town with about 5% affordable housing, and there are 42 units. In the homeownership area, we had 157 first mortgage loans and 76 staff loans. These are both lower than last year, but a little bit higher than last month, at least. We're seeing some anecdotal evidence that the housing market is not as bad as we thought it would be, but it's certainly not very strong right now. In May, there were 154 prepayments and 62 DAP prepayments, and that's almost exactly the same as last year. Any questions?
All right. If there are no other questions, we'll move on to the minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from the May 28th meeting?
This is George, so moved.
Is there a second?
Kathy, second.
All right. Hazim, are you going to do a roll call again for the minutes?
I can. Okay, yeah, Jerry Abrams,
Aye.
Tim Hodges,
Aye.
Kathy McKinnon,
Aye.
Josh Perez,
Yes.
Sarah Sanders,
Aye.
Jared Schmidt,
Aye.
Gwendolyn Haynes.
I'll abstain, I wasn't at the last meeting.
And I just want to make sure, Franklin, you are not on, correct? Okay, so,
All right. Motion is
That would have been fine if he answered yes, I'm not correct. I'm not.
could I have a motion to adjourn?
This is George, so moved.
Is there a second?
Second, Jerry Abrams.
All right. I think we can do this without a roll call. You agree, Hazim?
I agree.
yes.
Okay. All those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
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 We are adjourned. Talk to you all at the full board meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.